So, okay, here's a big one. You've written a ton on migration post-flood.
Yeah.
And so Alex is wondering, how did kangaroos get to Australia from the Ark? But can I ask you a double question?
Yeah.
It's based on the same thing. Because I actually read an article, and again, I think it was from Talk Origins, if I remember. It could have been another one of these anti-young Earth creation websites, but they'll go a step backwards and say, well, wait a minute, how did the kangaroos get to the Ark? And then how from the Ark did they get back to Australia? But correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't the Bible say that basically God sent the animals to the Ark?
Yes, sent the animals, and they could have been living close by where the Ark was built. So that's a
that one's easy. It's more so how did they get back? It would be the bigger
that's
question.
the real challenge.
Yeah.
And well, I believe they migrated pretty fast to the Indian Ocean. And I hear there is a petrograph of what looks like a kangaroo found in India a few years ago. You can read about that probably on creation.com. And I believe that log mats were floating around for quite a while after the flood. And so animals, as a log mat beaches, animals would sometimes migrate on them, and then maybe a high tide or a storm would lift the log mat. Now, these log mats would be huge. They'd probably be 100 up to 100, around 100 square kilometers, and they might be 10 meters thick of jammed up vegetation. And it can have green plants growing on them even, because I got pictures of logs in the water where green plants are growing from them. And so this could be a total different ecosystem. And kangaroos or other animals could get on these log mats and get transported long distances. That's how I think the marsupials got to Australia. And all the marsupial fossils are post-flood, I believe, even though they date them as old as late Oligocene. But I think that's due to circular reasoning, because when they first found all those marsupial fossils, they dated them in the Pleistocene. In other words, Ice Age. You think post-flood, well, yeah, that makes sense. But then they saw what they thought were primitive features. And they said it has to be older if it's primitive, and therefore by what's called the stage of evolution. Yeah, stage of evolution was a main dating method used for the marsupials. And it has been used, but I think in a more minor sense for North America and South America. But anyway, stage of evolution. Say, oh, we have to put this in the Pliocene. Oh, but here's something even more primitive. It goes in the Miocene. Oh, here's one that's even more so late Oligocene. That's how they date it. And you could probably get that resource on creation.com, because I've written a paper on that. So that's how I think they got there, and they're post-flood, and they're just dated by a crazy stage of evolution, because they didn't hardly have any radiometric dating methods to go on when they first dated these things. So it's just based on stage of evolution, which is just circular reasoning. What is a primitive feature?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask you.
Advanced feature. It's all arbitrary.
Yeah, when they talk about basal or primitive or derived,
yeah,
they're assuming, I think they would say a primitive feature would be like on mammals, body hair, because all primates have body hair, which means the earliest ancestors would have had body hair. So it's primitive, I think. So, I mean, that's all assuming evolution. That's all assuming body hair even evolved in the first place, and that we're looking at evolutionary succession. So when they say primitive marsupials, what do they really mean by that? Because they would say Homo erectus is a primitive human.
I know. Yeah.
But based on what? I mean, it looks fully human to me.
Yeah, right. His brain size is almost the size of modern man, and Neanderthals are even a little larger than modern man. So they have unique skull features. And I think that the top expert on fossil man among creation scientists is Peter Line from Australia.
Yes. Yeah. He's great. We did a nearly 10-hour series together addressing just all their favorite icons.
Oh, good.
Australopithecus,
Yeah.
afarensis, Neanderthals, Heidelbergensis. So
Oh, you've been on it.
he's a wealth of information on the hominin fossil record, like
Tremendous.
you're a wealth of information on the flood, brother. Okay, well, we're going to start to wrap it up, but I did want to ask, based on what you're saying, if as a creationist we choose a lower flood boundary, in light of what you're saying, we're saying that the kangaroos or a lot of the marsupials in Australia are post-flood. But we would also have mammals in the flood too. But if we add a lower flood boundary, would we be forced to say that there's really no mammals in the flood rocks and they're all post-flood?
There are some mammals in the flood rocks and the Mesozoic, but if the Cenozoic post-flood, you're going to have to say that hardly any mammals were buried in the flood.
Yeah.
But millions and tens of millions of them were buried after the flood and fossilized after the flood. What?
Yeah.
And then if you look at the details, you have various mammals that suddenly evolve and then they go extinct. Like the Brontothere, which is a kind of a weird rhinoceros. He came along in the bottom of the Eocene and disappeared at the top. Is this a worldwide sequence for this post-flood? So it runs into it's a huge amount of conundrums if you believe in a low flood post-flood body. This is one of 35 criterion I have that it's an upper Cenozoic, especially in the Pleistocene, would be the post-flood. But even parts of the Pleistocene, I think, are from the flood.
Yeah, it's a good, helpful response. So would they have to say, well, most of obviously they would agree, as in those that have a difference in opinion on flood boundaries. If you were to hold to a lower flood boundary, would you have to say that most mammals, as in there's only a few mammal fossils from the flood and most are post-flood? Yeah. Would you have to say that possibly they existed in a community? Because we would explain a lot of the fossils, the ordering of the fossils due to burial by ecosystems and communities.
Yes.
So would they say that mammals simply existed in a community, maybe at a higher elevation that just simply did not get fossilized? Maybe because of where they lived?
Okay, if you have the KPG boundary, mammals have to originate from the ark, starting with 2. And they have to mushroom, spread all over the world, even to North America, when you have all these huge catastrophes going. The history of the Cenozoic is huge catastrophes occurred.
Yeah.
So how are you going to be able to form develop tens of millions of, hundreds of millions of mammals, spread them globally, bury them, sometimes buried thousands of meters deep, fossilize them all after the flood? So yeah, that's I think a pretty powerful argument that the flood boundary is a lot higher, and that these mammals of the Cenozoic were buried in the flood.
And the flood was a geological catastrophe. And
Yes.
so when we look to geology rather than paleontology, then we come up with an upper flood boundary. I think it has more explanatory power in terms of the geological features that we find, right, Mike?
Oh, yeah, by far. I said I have 35 criteria. You can look at my website where I flesh them out, or on creation.com. Those creation scientists that believe in a boundary near the KPG, the Cretaceous Paleogene or Paleocene, mostly do it because of fossils. And they have a pretty strong argument, but I've been I spent a lot of time looking at that argument. And I think that I've come to the conclusion that many of the Cenozoic fossils can look close to modern genera, can look close. But genera and species and all that classification I also found is kind of a bag of worms too. where there's a couple dozen definitions of species. Anyway, and right now they're arguing about what's the higher level classification of dinosaurs at the order level, and they're saying that this HIP criterion is rather arbitrary. So there's a lot of controversy there, but so I've come to the conclusion that you're going to have some mammals that are from the flood that are fairly similar and maybe even identical. I haven't taken it that far with ones we see today. I'm coming to that conclusion.
Well, that's good. So those in the lower flood boundary group, I guess, they have more geology related challenges. We in the higher flood boundary, we have more paleontological related challenges, but you're saying we have some pretty decent answers currently. We're working on it, but currently we have some okay answers in explaining the paleontology, Mike.
Yes, and I've spent hundreds of hours looking at that stuff, and that's the conclusion I've come to, is that many of these, especially mammals, that some of them are close. Like I believe you can have what's called a mastodon from the flood and a mastodon in the ice age. Now, a lot of times the mastodons from the flood are different than those in the ice age. They're not exactly the same. They might be put in the same genera, but they could be still very different. Like you have the American mastodon in the U.S., but then you have a mastodon that has 4 tusks. They redefined it as a gomphothere, which is essentially a new definition of certain mastodons. But so this is what I find. And it could be you find mammoths that are from the flood, but they'd be different than the woolly mammoth I'd expect. And so these are possible. I wouldn't think you'd have very many of these. You can have the fossil record has a lot of elephant kinds. And so in those kinds, some of them are close to mammoth and mastodons that are from the ice age. So I've come to that conclusion looking at their data, hundreds of hours of looking at. But on the contrary, the paleontologists don't look at the geological arguments that Tim Clary and I have advanced over the years, the 35 criterion, like Cenozoic coal. You have a lot of coal in the Cenozoic, clear to the late Cenozoic. And I can't see any way that can be formed post-flood. So that would say the boundary is way up there. So that's one argument. I mean, there's 35 of those. And I've talked to them, and they don't really want to go into it, which to me, their whole argument is from a weak point of view if they haven't examined Clary and my geological argument. Some of our arguments are from paleontology too, by the way, from organic, like the one you mentioned about the mammals.
Right.
That's one of
whales. Whales is a big one.
Yeah, that'd be part of the mammal argument. So
yeah, I've found your presentations. You've done 3 here on the channel. I think 3, one on the post-flood, pre-flood, and then we did like an answering the critics one. And also so heavy material there. And also Tim Clary, he's given a recent presentation on where the flood boundary is on another channel, Logos Ministries, I think it was. And so I found them all to be very convincing, Mike, especially in terms of the geologic evidence.